Can Israel be threatened by the student university protests against the unaliving of Palestinians? There's a lot of attention that has come to these student protesters in these universities. Some were arrested and harshly treated by the arresters, which has made a lot of voices speak out against this. Even though the protests were silent and not wrongfully conducted, it's even made Uncle Sam speak out against them. But officials advise them not to because it can tarnish his political reputation and make him less famous amongst the young generation in the upcoming election. And basically people are just questioning the whole narrative as to why Israel has so much influence in a country that they are not governing. Leave your thoughts in the comment section and tell us what you think about today's discussion. But at the same time, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is trying to hold the leader of Israel accountable for the crimes is committed against the Palestinian. But he's saying that this too is anti-Semitism towards him and basically saying that nobody should hold him accountable because what he's doing is right, saying that the state of Israel has the right to defend itself. So in today's video, we're questioning the narrative or the hidden agenda behind stopping these protests.
Please understand that these kids have been protesting their entire lives. This is the Sandy Hook generation. These kids who are now in college were between kindergarten and 5th grade when Sandy Hook happened. They were between 6th grade and 11th grade when Parkland happened. These are kids who marched in the street in 2018 when Parkland was happening and nobody in the government was listening to them. Their entire experience of education has been under attack, whether they are hiding under desks during drills or barricading doors, or whether their schools are occupied by police officers. They have been in danger their entire education. It is inaccurate and blood-boiling when I hear Bibi Netanyahu call these kids anti-Semitic. Please understand, for context and juxtaposition, Israeli 18-year-olds are mandated to join the IDF. They spend their entire lives knowing that they will be trained as soldiers. American children are trained to be under siege. For these kids, there is no safe classroom to return to. The classroom has always been a space of volatility and chance. This is personal to me because these are my kids. I taught at a New York City public school for 10 years while I taught at Columbia. I also taught at NYU. I know these kids. And if you don't get what they've been through, the anxieties they faced, if you have not had to barricade yourself in a classroom with a bunch of students and make them be quiet so that we could all be safe, then you might not understand what this generation is standing up to.
Hey guys, so there's a thing happening where, members of the commentariat, people who are commenting on the protests on now dozens of college campuses across the country I don't know how else you can describe it other than bullying the students on these campuses by claiming that these protests, and I think out of a genuine fear that these protests will have a sort of 1968 effect, the 1968 anti-Vietnam War protests that roiled the Chicago Democratic Convention and really, cost Lyndon Baines Johnson the presidency because he ended up withdrawing. Hubert Humphrey ended up being the nominee. Long story short, essentially Vietnam drove Johnson off the ticket and Nixon ended up becoming president. And I think so out of a genuine fear that is going to play out again, a fear that's being fueled on purpose by people like Christopher Rufo, the fake moral panic guy from critical race theory and DEI, and people on the right who are trying to glom on to these protests and push, the narrative that this is a reason to, I guess in their mind, vote for Donald Trump, who has an even worse record when it comes to Palestinians and Israel and any idea of peace. But anyway, I think out of a genuine fear that a sort of 1968 moment is building, you're starting to see people in the, Democratic side commentariat essentially try to bludgeon these young people on these college campuses to essentially kind of order them to stop caring about what's happening in Gaza. Stop caring about the 34,000 people who are mainly women and children. Stop protesting it. Stop talking about it. Stop being mad about it. Stop feeling any way about it. And trying to bully these students into shutting up and accepting that whatever it is that the Israeli government, which is a foreign government, a nation state government, does is fine, and you've got to accept it because otherwise you're going to hurt Joe Biden, and that's the narrative. And I get where that's coming from, out of a fear of a Trump presidency, which is something genuinely to fear. But that is happening at the same time that the leader of that nation state, Bibi Netanyahu, is like making English language videos stating that not only are these protests inherently anti-Semitic, even though a lot of the students who are participating in the protests are themselves Jewish. And the Columbia University protests began with two organizations being banned from Columbia: Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace. The Columbia University chapters of both of those organizations were banned. That's part of what started the protests. One of those is Jewish Voice for Peace. But, so you've got the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, claiming that these protests are in and of themselves anti-Semitic because they're critical of Israel, nation state's policies. And then the second piece of it, you've got some American politicians, including some Democrats, saying the same thing, even though, some Jewish politicians like Bernie Sanders are saying the opposite, saying that's not true.
No, Mr. Netanyahu, it is not anti-Semitic or pro-Hamas to point out that in a little over 6 months, your extremism has killed 34,000 Palestinians and wounded more than 78,000, 70% of whom are women and children. It is not anti-Semitic to point out that your bomb has completely destroyed more than 221,000 housing units in Gaza, leaving more than 1 million people homeless, almost half the population. It is not anti-Semitic to note that your government has obliterated Gaza's civilian infrastructure, electricity, water, and sewage. It is not anti-Semitic to realize that your government has annihilated Gaza's healthcare system, knocking 26 hospitals out of service and killing more than 400 healthcare workers. It is not anti-Semitic to condemn your government's destruction of all of Gaza's 12 universities and 56 of its schools, with hundreds more damage, leaving 625,000 students with no educational opportunities. It is not anti-Semitic to agree with virtually every humanitarian organization in saying that your government, in violation of American law, has unreasonably blocked humanitarian aid coming into Gaza, creating the conditions in which so many thousands of children face malnutrition and famine. Mr. Netanyahu, anti-Semitism is a vile and disgusting form of bigotry that has done unspeakable harm to many millions of people. But please, do not insult the intelligence of the American people by attempting to distract us from the immoral and illegal war policies of your extremist and racist. Do not use anti-Semitism to deflect attention from the criminal indictment you are facing in the Israeli courts. It is not anti-Semitic to hold you accountable for your actions.
And then he's also saying, Netanyahu, that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, if they were to issue indictments against him, which would be individual indictments against himself and some of his war cabinet ministers, maybe his defense minister, we don't know who they might be, or even if the ICC is going to issue arrest warrants charging them with crimes against humanity or whatever. But he's saying those charges would be anti-Semitic.
You have to hear this to believe this. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is contemplating issuing arrest warrants against senior Israeli government and military officials as war criminals. This would be an outrage of historic proportions. International bodies like the ICC arose in the wake of the Holocaust against the Jewish people. They were set up to prevent such horrors, to prevent future genocide. Yet now, the International Court is trying to put Israel in the dock. It's trying to put us in the dock as we defend ourselves against genocide regimes, Iran of course, that openly works to destroy the one and only Jewish state. Branding Israel's leaders and soldiers as war criminals will pour jet fuel on the fires of anti-Semitism, those fires that are already raging on the campuses of America and across capitals around the world. It will also be the first time that a democratic country fighting for its life according to the rules of war is itself accused of war crimes.
Wait a minute, how sway? You're now taking the very real, very legitimate issue of anti-Semitism, which is spiking around the world, and which is a genuine problem, just as anti-Muslim bigotry is a rising and spiking problem around the world. These both are real, genuine things, but you're now saying that you're taking that very real thing and saying, no, 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 anti-Semitism is indicting me as an individual. You've now personalized it to yourself. So you're saying that you, because you are the head of this nation state, if you are indicted, that's anti-Semitism? Wait a minute. So you're saying that it's about you. It's about you yourself as this prime minister of a nation state. That if you get indicted for your actions, your decisions, the decisions that you made as the head of the nation state, that's anti-Semitism too? I need somebody to explain to me how that could possibly be. Because anti-Semitism is the hatred of a people based on their Jewish identity. And that is a pernicious and awful thing. But a criminal indictment of you, if it happens, and nobody knows if it's going to happen, it wouldn't be a criminal indictment, it would be a ICC indictment. If that happened, that's not hatred of Benjamin Netanyahu as a Jewish person. That is an assessment that Benjamin Netanyahu, as the head of a nation state, may have committed war crimes.
Why is there an agenda to stop this protest in particular? To answer this question, let us first understand the impact of protests themselves. Protests are powerful expressions of dissent, often challenging authority and demanding change. Those in political positions or benefiting from conflicts may fear protests escalating for several reasons. Firstly, escalation can lead to loss of control, jeopardizing their authority and stability. Secondly, violent or disruptive protests can damage public perception and legitimacy. But this protest in particular isn't violent now, is it? And in a few moments, we're going to talk about the impacts that a silent protest has compared to a violent one, and why the powers that be have a fear for this particular protest. Protests may attract unwanted attention from the media, exposing corruption or injustice. Furthermore, prolonged protests can disrupt daily life and economic activities, causing inconvenience and unrest among the population. And to prevent any protest from escalating further, authorities have to deploy tactics such as negotiation or diversion to maintain order. But we haven't seen that in this protest, and in fact we've seen the opposite. Let's look at some of the reasons as to why silent protests are more impactful than violent ones. Silent protests, though devoid of verbal communication, possess a profound capacity to amplify marginalized narratives and challenge dominant political agendas. In contexts where political powers seek to suppress or manipulate certain narratives, silent protests emerge as a potent tool for bringing awareness to overlooked or silenced issues. Silent protests subvert traditional modes of communication, drawing attention through their stark contrast with the usual glamour of public discourse. Silent protests are not usually overwhelming like the violent ones, but they grab the most attention when people begin to question the narrative. Maybe there's something deeper that we're not seeing here. Why are these people protesting for days or weeks or months and they are not violent about it? What might be at play that we're not seeing? By abstaining from verbal expression, participants compel observers to pause and reflect, prompting curiosity and inquiry into the motivations behind the protest. This deliberate silence serves as a symbolic gesture, speaking volumes about the gravity of these issues that are at hand and the urgency for action. The issue at hand is the conflict, and the urgency is that we might be witnessing a race of people being erased from the history books. Hence, this protest is bringing awareness to that. And as you know, the powers that be don't just fear the message that these protests are speaking out, but what they fear are the implications, the consequences that might reverberate far and beyond. Several protests throughout history have had significant impacts on political leaders, leading to their early retirement or the abandonment of their political careers. Some notable examples include the People Power Revolution in the Philippines, 1986. Massive protests known as the People Power Revolution erupted in the Philippines, demanding the resignation of President Ferdinand Marcos, who had ruled for over 20 years amid allegations of corruption and human rights misuse. The protests culminated in Marcos fleeing the country and ultimately led to his downfall. The second one is the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, 1989. Protests against the communist regime in Czechoslovakia, spearheaded by dissent leaders like Václav Havel, brought about the end of communism rule and forced President Gustav Hašek to resign. The peaceful protests, known as the Velvet Revolution, paved the way for democratic reforms and Havel's ascent to the presidency. The third one is the Arab Spring in 2010 to 2012. A wave of protests swept across several Arab countries, demanding political reform, economic justice, and an end to authoritarian rule. In Tunisia, widespread protests led to the ousting of President Zain El Abidine Ben Ali in 2011, marking the beginning of the Arab Spring. Subsequent protests in countries like Egypt, Libya, and Yemen also resulted in the resignation or overthrow of political leaders. The fourth one is South Korean protests in 2016 to 2017. Mass demonstrations erupted in South Korea in 2016, calling for the resignation of President Park Geun-hye over allegations of corruption and influence peddling. The protests, which mobilized millions of people, ultimately led to Park's impeachment and removal from office in 2017. And the other notable one was Sudanese protests in 2018 to 2019. Months of protests in Sudan, initially sparked by rising bread prices, evolved into a broader movement calling for an end to the 30-year rule of President Omar al-Bashir. The sustained protests eventually led to al-Bashir's ousting by the military in April 2019. Therefore, these examples highlight the power of mass mobilization and collective action in holding political leaders accountable and effecting change. In each case, sustained protests, often fueled by widespread grievances and aspirations for democratic reform, played a decisive role in forcing leaders to step down or relinquish power. And perhaps that's the reason why there's an agenda to stop these protests, because the leader of Israel fears that he might lose his power if major awarenesses come to their attention. And some African countries are also joining in bringing awareness and bringing attention to these protests, countries such as South Africa. So the leader of Israel doesn't want to be held accountable for the wrongs he's done, and at the same time Biden doesn't want this protest to continue, because if they do, he might just give up, potentially giving way for Donald Trump to be elected as the next president. And that's the reason why there's a lot of urgency from authorities around these protests. But you tell me what you think in the comment section. Do you think the ICC should hold the leader of Israel accountable for these crimes? And if you think they should, do you think the powers that be are gonna let them? I will see you in the next video. Like, share, and subscribe. Signing off, and stay safe.